We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Beis in Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 73b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara tried to suggest that the Machlokes Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi in the Braisa was the same Machlokes as Abai and Rava, whether Eid Zomim is Lemafreya Hu Nifsal, is an Eid Zomim disqualified retroactively, or is it Mikanu L'Habohu Nifsal, that it's only from this point in time when he was falsified and onward that he is disqualified. And now the Gemara says maybe that's not the case. Maybe the Machlokes between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi, in that case in the Braisa, is whether Toch Kedei Dibor is Kedibor Dami or not. The Rabbanan will hold Lav Kedibor Dami, the Toch Kedei Dibor is not Kedibor. As Rashi explains, Lav Kedibor Dami, meaning V'havale Shnei Ediyos. The point over here is that the Edom testified on the Geneva and on the Tvicha Toch Kedei Dibor, but it's considered to be two separate testimonies. Therefore, if it's two separate testimonies, you don't throw out the whole thing just because you have disqualified the Tvicha. Just because one of them is thrown out doesn't mean the other one is contradicted. The Mishas Dibor Achron Nifsalu, because again, we're going to say that it's only from the moment in time of that later Dibor that they're disqualified, when they said Tvicha. V'lo Mishas Dibor Rishon, not from that first testimony that they said that the person stole. That's what the Rabbanan will hold. But again, according to this approach, everybody might hold Lemafreya Hu Nifsal. For Rabbi Yossi holds Toch Kedei Dibor Kedibor Dami. The Toch Kedei Dibor is considered Kedibor, and therefore, as Rashi says, Kedibor Dami Ukechad Eidos Dami, the testimony that the person stole and slaughtered is all one testimony. And therefore, retroactively, they're disqualified at that point in time, at that moment, and you throw out the entire testimony, even though the disqualification, the hazama, even though the falsification was only on the tvicha. But the Gemara continues, V'savar Rabbi Yossi Toch Kedei Dibor Kedibor Dami. But does Rabbi Yossi really hold that Toch Kedei Dibor is considered Kedibor? Is that really the case? V'atanan, but we learned in the Mishnah, Harezu Temuras Ola Temuras Shlamim. If a person says that this animal is going to be a Tmur, it's going to be exchanged for this carbon Ola and exchanged for the carbon Shlamim. The idea is when you make a Tmura, that the animal gets the same Kedusha as that first animal. You have an animal that's like an Ola, and then you say this animal is like that animal. But here, the person said Temuras Ola, Temuras Shlamim. He said both phrases. So the Mishnah says, Harezu Temuras Ola. So we take what he said first, and we say it's a Temuras Ola. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yossi says, Im lekach neskavin mitchila. If that was his intention from the beginning, Hoil v'afshar likro shnei shemos ke'echad, since it's impossible to say two things at once, Devorav kayamin. So then what he said is accepted. V'im amar Temuras Ola. But if he said Temuras Ola, v'nimlach v'amar Temuras Shlamim, then he changed his mind and said Temuras Shlamim, Harezu Temuras Ola, then it is a Temuras Ola. So we ask on this Mishnah to clarify what's going on over here. Nimlach, if the person changed his mind, Pshita, isn't it obvious? Meaning to say, if the person changed his mind and said Temuras Shlamim, of course that doesn't count for anything. He already said Temuras Ola. What exactly does Rabbi Yossi mean when he said that if he changes his mind, it's a Temuras Ola? V'yamar Rapapa, and Rapapa said on this, Nimlach b'soch kedei dibor klamrinan, that the case over here is that he changed his mind toch kedei dibor. And so therefore, what essentially Rabbi Yossi is saying is that if the person changed his mind toch kedei dibor, still we don't care. We still say it's a Temuras Ola, and apparently Rabbi Yossi is saying toch kedei dibor is lav kedibor dami. And the Gemara says to that, Amri, the answer to that, Shrei toch kedei dibor havi. There's actually two different kinds of toch kedei dibor. Chad kedei she'elas Talmud l'Rav. One is the amount of time it takes for a student to greet his Rebbe. V'chad kedei she'elas Rav l'Talmud. The other is the amount of time for a Rebbe to greet his student. Chi lesle l'Rabbi Yossi kedei she'elas Talmud l'Rav. Rabbi Yossi does not hold of toch kedei dibor. If it's the amount of time for the Talmud to greet his Rebbe, that's a little bit longer amount of time, because there you say Shalom alecha Rebbe umori denafish. The Talmud says the words Shalom alecha Rebbe umori. That's a lot of words. There he doesn't hold of toch kedei dibor kedibor dami. But but the amount of time for the Rebbe to greet the Talmud, which is just Shalom Alecha, that's just two words, that's a shorter amount of time, Islay, so then he does hold Toch Kedei Dibor Kedibor Dami. And Rashi explains, Harezu Temuras Ola Divrei Rabbi Meir. Again, the first opinion in the Mishnah was Rabbi Meir. The person says Temuras Ola, Temuras Shlamim. We say Temuras Ola. The Islay Rabbi Meir, Tfos Lashon Rishon. Because Rabbi Meir holds you take what the person said first. That's what you take seriously, so to speak. And then Rabbi Yossi said, if that was his intention from the beginning, since it's impossible to say two things at once, so then Devorav Kayamin. What that means is, Rashi says, Devorav Kayamin, V'tira Ad Shetistaiv. In other words, we assume that he meant both. He had both in mind. And therefore, what we say say is that the animal should graze until it develops a mum. V'timacher, then we sell the animal. V'yavi b'dmei chetzia ola, and you take half of the money you bring an ola, over v'dmei chetzia shlamim, and half of the money you bring a shlamim. Meaning to say, Rabbi Yossi at first is saying, if the person's intention really was for both ola and shlamim, then we take that seriously, and we do both an ola and shlamim by having the animal graze, and we use half the money for an ola, half of the money for a shlamim. However, if there was a change in the person's mind, he started out Tmuras ola and then Tmuras shlamim, that's when we say Tmuras ola. And again, the Gemara then clarifies we're talking about a case of toch kedei dibor, and the Gemara makes that distinction between kedei she'elas Talmud l'Rav and kedei she'elas harav l'Talmud. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Samar Rava says, Eidim shehuchshu l'vasof huzmu, if witnesses are contradicted and then they are falsified neharag and they are killed, ta'achasha tchilas hazamahi, because contradiction is the beginning of falsification. Ela shelo nigmara, just that it's not complete. Meaning to say, let's say you have witnesses that two other witnesses come in and contradict what they say, but then ultimately they're falsified. The witnesses say, Imanu hayisam, you were with us, and therefore you couldn't have been there to testify. So that's considered a normal case of Eidim Zomim, says Rava, and the punishment for Eidim Zomin is Kasher Zamam, so if they try to kill the defendant, that's why it says Neherag, and they are going to be killed. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Mena Aminullah, from where can I show that this is true? It's from the following Brisa. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Mi'idoni bi'ishploni shasimes ein avdo v'hipel eshino, the person testifies that so-and-so blinded his slave, he knocked out his eye, or he knocked out the tooth of his slave. The halach in general is that if a master knocks out the eye or the tooth of his slave, the slave goes free. And the Brisa continues, Shaharei harav omer kain, and the master himself says this. It seems to be saying that this is an advantageous claim to the master himself. V'nimtzu zomen, then it turns out that these witnesses that testify that again this master knocked out the eye of a slave or knocked out the tooth, it's found that they are false witnesses. Mishalmin dmei ayin le'eved, they have to pay the value of the eye to the slave. And the Gemara now says, what exactly is the case? This doesn't really make sense. Hechi dami, what's the case? Ilema kidekatani, if you're going to say that this brisa means exactly what it seems to be saying, meaning deleka kasachrina, there is no other set of witnesses, you simply have a set of witnesses that say that so-and-so, that the master blinded his eved, knocked out his tooth, and then they were found to be zomamin. So mishalmin dmei ayin le'eved, why would they pay the value of the eye to the eved? Basar demafki le'lecheres demei eino kaboy shalume, after they're trying to get him free, now they have to pay him for the eye, meaning these witnesses are coming in to the advantage of the Eved. They're saying that the Rav, that the master knocked out the eye of the Eved, they're essentially letting the Eved go free. Why would they then pay the value of the eye to the Eved? The Eved's going free, they're doing something to his advantage before they were falsified. V'yoden further, to make kulei Eved l'raboy l'shlume. Furthermore, when they're falsified, they should actually have to pay the master, because they were trying to make him lose an Eved, they should have to pay the Demei Kulei Eved. They should have to pay the value of the entire Eved to the master. That's what it should have said. V'yoden further, Shaharei Horav Omer Kain. It says that the master wants to agree with them. It's to his advantage that he knocked out the eye or knocked out the tooth of his Eved. That doesn't make sense either. Harav Minichole, is it good for the Rav? Is it good for the master if he has to set his Eved free? So clearly there is something missing in this brisa, says Rava. And the Gemara continues, Elalav, rather is it not? Rava now says, what is really the explanation of this brisa? Kagon da'asu beitrei, what happened is that two witnesses came. V'amri hipeles shino simes eno, and they say that the master knocked out the tooth first, which set the Eved free, and then knocked out his eye, deboy mesev le harav d'me eno. So now the master has to pay this free man, because this Eved just went free because the tooth was knocked out. He now has to pay this former Eved, this free man, the value of his eye. That's a lot of money. That's what the first witnesses say. V'asu beitrei mitzvah, and now two middle witnesses come. V'amri, and they say eno v'hadar shino, that you have the order reversed. Really, the master knocked out the eye first and then the tooth. Delo boy lemesev le'el d'mei sheno. So now the master only has to pay for the value of the tooth. So what's really happening over here is the first witnesses are contradicting the middle witnesses. The first witnesses are saying that the master owes the value of the eye, and the middle witnesses are saying it's just the value of the tooth. V'hainu shaharei harav omer kain, and that's what it means in the brisa when it says that the master says that is what happened, that it's to his advantage, because it's pleasant to him, it is pleasing for him what the middle witnesses are saying. The middle witnesses are saying he only owes the value of the tooth and not the value of the eye. That's what it means shaharei harav omer kain. V'katani, and then the Brisa says, v'nimtzu zomin, that middle set, that they were trying to say the master only owes the value of a tooth, so they were found to be zomin, they were false witnesses. That's a third set of witnesses came in and said, imanu hayisem, you were with us. So in that situation, mitziyoy mishalmin d'mei ayin le'eved, that middle set of witnesses, they have to pay the value of the eye to the slave, because they're trying to make the slave lose out on the value of his eye. They were trying to have it that he was only going to get the value of his tooth, and that was their false testimony, and therefore kasher zamam, what they tried to do, they tried to make the Eved lose the value of his eye. That's what they have to pay to the Eved. And the point is, shmami no hachasha tchilas hazamahi. You see from this brisa that contradiction, because initially it's just a contradiction between the first witnesses and the middle witnesses, that must be the beginning of hazama, so that when they're ultimately falsified, they still have to pay kasher zamam. And the Gemara says, Amar Abaya says, lo, no, that's not what's going on in this brisa. Abaya is arguing with Rava. Rather, ta'afchinu va'azminhu. The case actually is that they reversed and falsified. Mimayan, how do we know that? And Rashi explains, Amar le Abaya lo, Abaya says to Rava, no, that's not the interpretation of the brisa. Idu huchshu al yedei kas rishon. If the case is that middle set was contradicted by a first set, so shuv ein kas shalishas mezimasan. So then, if a third set comes along and says that the middle set was imanu hayisam, falsifies that middle set, so that wouldn't be considered hazama. They wouldn't be considered edem zomin because they were already contradicted. And Abaya is saying we don't say hachasha is tchilas hazama. V'hachen over here kashe'ein sham kas rishon. The case is there is no first set. All you have is the middle set, and the middle set again is saying that the master owes the value of the tooth to the Eved, because first the master knocked out the eye, then the master knocked out the tooth. That's what the middle set, which is now the first set, that's what they say. Elohim, they're the only set that comes in at first to say that the Eved goes free. With the kasha loch, and you had a kasha, to may Eved l'rab, boy l'shlumi, that really they're essentially trying to set the Eved free, and so therefore the entire value of the Eved is what they owe the master once they're falsified. Hach, over here the case is as follows. Kagon shakas shniya afchinu va'azminu. The second set come in and they reverse what that first set is saying and they falsify. Meaning, sha'amru lahem, they say to them, oh, so hayom shatem omrim, this day that you're talking about, imanu hayisam b'makom ploni, you were with us in a different place, there's no way that you can know. So they falsify that set of witnesses. Avol b'yom achar have, but actually it did happen on a different day. V'ipcha have, and it was exactly the reverse of what you say. You say that the value of the tooth is owed because the eye was knocked out first. We say the value of the eye was owed because the tooth was knocked out first. Now in this case, we know for sure the Eved is going free, because everyone is testifying to that. And so therefore, that first set has to pay the value of the eye, that they wanted him to lose. It's better for the Rav, for the master, obviously, that he should go out, he should go free by his eye, and then he'll only have to pay for the tooth. And Rashi notes, V'ikasha, now if you're going to ask on this explanation of Abaye, Ho'av Rishonim him, since this is actually the first set, this middle set is the first set really in Abaye's answer, might have a mafsa delay, so they're not really causing any loss to the Eved, because the Eved is starting from being an Eved, he's starting from nothing. Halacheros have a mafkele, at the end of the day, they're setting the Eved free with their testimony, and they're giving him the value of his tooth. You can't call that any loss to the Eved. Why do they owe the Eved any money? V'akati d'mei Eved l'Rav boy l'shlumi, so still they really should pay the value of the Eved to the master, because that's the party that they're trying to make lose money. The Gemara will ask this question later on, and the Gemara is going to say that the cases, they actually already had a court case about this issue, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Dalid Amud Aleph.